how certain, given the poll numbers, can we think about now the next president of the United States? Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump?
Hillary Clinton, almost certainly, but in this year where everything's been unpredictable and all the rules have been thrown out the window, I would say it's not guaranteed. I'd say about 98% chance that she would win because she's so far ahead in the swing states. She's moved ahead in some Republican states. Donald Trump is only competitive right now in one of the key swing states.
Is it more, Professor Chambers, about saving face for Mr. Trump at this moment, leading up to the presidential eventually election, or he still has some chance to turn it back?
Well, it's a little of both. He does have a chance, and as Rick Dunham said, we can't predict the future. He has galvanized a huge following. Some people, particularly in the minority community, have called it white nationalism that has maybe some fascist roots. He even has Klansmen in his camp. But he has galvanized a lot of people who don't usually vote, who are extremely angry. And these people can tip the scales in certain states. Now, however, at the same time, because prominent Republicans, many of whom are very conservative themselves, seem to be in some kind of civil war with him now, it might not be a saving face sort of situation, but revenge. He has now said that the shackles are now off of him, and that's a direct quote from the Republican Party.
I see.
And that's a very scary thought.
Mr. Dunham, Mitch McConnell, Paul Ryan, both of the names may not be that familiar to our international audience, but certainly well-known Republican names in the United States. Two establishments. They have denounced Trump's words, but never said, since they started supporting his presidential candidacy, never said that they are against it until now. They've never done that. So what does that mean?
It means they're in a difficult position. You mentioned the two leaders of the Republicans in Congress, the House and the Senate, and they're both afraid that they will lose their control that they have right now. The Senate Republican majority is very tenuous. There are a lot of very close races, and if things get worse for Trump, if he goes to war, if the shackles are off and he starts attacking them, they could lose Congress. So they want to denounce what he's saying that moderate voters, that swing voters dislike, but they're afraid of alienating his supporters, because if these hardcore Republicans don't vote for the Republicans for Congress, the Democrats could win everything.
What are we thinking about, Professor Chambers? Is it the president, the position of the president, the White House, or is it really the GOP's future that we are talking about here?
It's both. It's the leadership
you
of the
can't
country,
sit on the
control
fences,
of the
sir.
White
You
House.
can't do that.
Well, I mean, but that's what makes it so unpredictable and makes 2016 such a crazy year. I mean, we've seen it overseas in the Brexit vote in England. I mean, we cannot discount certain other factors, and so we are seeing a fight for the soul of the Republican Party as it relates to control of the White House. The last time we saw a fight for control of a political party and it translating to the White House was in 1860, when our political parties disintegrated, and Abraham Lincoln was elected president of the United States, and we descended into civil war. So the fate of one political party can be tied to the White House and American history.
Professor Fu, you've been attentively listening to the other two panelists coming from the U.S. Of course, the scenes that we saw these years with the presidential debate in the U.S., unprecedented, shall I say, in my journalism career. But may I ask you, as one of those Chinese elites, intellectuals, watching those debates, and watching the debates going on in the American society in response to the two presidential candidates, what do you make of it?
Well, I guess because of the very powerful image of visual stuff, TVs, internets, popular view tend to be fragmented. And with that background, people's view tend to be very extreme. So it's not just the candidates, it's the population that make the presidential campaign
you think
so
that's dangerous
special.
To you? not?
In a way, we should be very tentative of that. I guess this is a very critical variable in terms of the technology of new media. As far as I see the candidates, they are normal, but they represent some of the voices that people want to hear. So that in order to make them very appealing to the people, they have to be very extreme. Now, you are talking about some people sort of backing on the Republican side. My reading of that is if you read the polls, the probability is very high for Hillary Clinton to win if you read the polling. And the Republican has a soul to sell. The Republican Party tend to be a conservative party. They have core values to defend. So in that sense, it makes sense for some people sort of to back down a little bit.
Well, earlier, as the two gentlemen have just discussed from the U.S., the polls, yes, it does suggest certain directions, but this is a very hilarious year politically. Therefore, a lot of things could happen. So what are some of the uncertain factors, Mr. Dunham, given your rich experience in journalism and your rich experience covering presidential elections at this moment?
Well, there's something called the October surprise.
Yes.
People are always waiting.
We're already in October.
And we've already had two. The Donald Trump probably didn't pay federal income tax for 20 years, and his what he calls the locker room talk. We already know that there are many more tape recordings of him from his days as a TV star, and we could have tapes. We could have more conversations. There are also women who have accused him of sexual misconduct. They could come forward. I mean, I'm not saying it is true, but they could come forward. Yeah. On the Hillary Clinton side, you have the Russian government just released another batch of hacked tapes of some of her top advisors saying very embarrassing things, and transcripts of some of her behind closed door meetings that had her talking about taking public positions and private positions. So there are these unpredictable things. You have unprecedented Russian government involvement in an American election and more leaks possible, and then there are just so many things that could happen. And then Donald Trump's own behavior. He could do something unpredictable.
Well, of course, at this moment, Russia denied its direct involvement in any of those elections, but of course, that's something between the United States and Russia. Having said that, though, Professor Chambers, besides what Mr. Dunham just said, what are some of the other uncertain factors from a communications perspective?
Well, you have a situation where Hillary Clinton does have a lot of, as they say, feet on the ground, soldiers on the ground, if you will, in various states helping out the campaign. At the same time, though, you have a very strong mass media message from Trump getting out to get out the vote in various swing states among his core supporters. And again, a lot of those core supporters don't include minorities, et cetera, but mostly blue-collar working or poor white people who have not really seen a candidate that excites them, although they do hate Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. So there's a mass media message out there that is counter to Hillary Clinton's more bureaucratic machine on the ground. And that could, ironically, could turn out more votes than the machine on the ground. So that's one of the variables that we have to watch. Can that message bring people out to vote? And it looks like in certain circles it will, but it might not be enough to beat Hillary Clinton.
I see. On the other hand, we also see some weird phenomena, if I could use that word, Mr. Dunham. That is, you see Donald Trump against his vice president candidate in terms of foreign policy and even some of domestic policies. You also see Hillary Clinton against Barack Obama. Two of them are Democrats. They serve both in one term at least. So you see a lot of crisscross argument and accusations against one another between parties, within parties, between individuals, just among even supposed to be allies. Right. At least for the moment.
It is very unusual to have a presidential candidate disavow his vice presidential candidate, which is what Donald Trump did in this debate about Syria policy. I've never seen that happen before. And even saying, I never talked to him. Hillary Clinton disagreeing with Barack Obama, that is a double-edged sword. It is often common that candidates distance themselves from the unpopular parts of their party's president. And Al Gore did that. George Bush the first did that with Reagan. Right. But Obama's very popular, so it's dangerous to distance her from him.
There's another weird phenomenon, Professor Chambers. The U.S. media have been heatedly talking about this over the past 24 hours since the debate. That is, one of those candidates is talking about publicly of putting another candidate into jail once he is in power or in the White House. Not to mention whether he has this legal power or not, but these kind of words publicly, what kinds of messages does it really send to the American public and also about the American system?
It sends the right message to his supporters, which is primarily why he said that, whether he has the power or not, whether he would even do that or not. That was primarily to galvanize the troops, basically, almost as a pep talk. So it had that purpose. But he has said things like this in the past, and various right-wing newspapers, et cetera, have suggested this. I think it's something that is unprecedented. It has never happened before. It actually didn't even happen in 1860 when we were on the verge of a civil war. Nobody wanted to jail Abraham Lincoln before the war started. I mean, this is unprecedented. This is why you've seen Republicans, not just moderates, but others move away from him, not just on the sexual comments. So it is, you know, you've even had some former U.S. Attorney Generals, not just Democrats, who have said, whoa, 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 we shouldn't really talk, people shouldn't talk about this. This is embarrassing for the country, and it has other nations looking at America and saying, you know, what have you become?
Well, other nations...
And indeed, some say...
Other nations are looking at America. For example, China.
Well, yes.
Professor Fu, two things. One is, what does this, if I could use the adjective interesting, if not chaotic process in the American election this year, what kind of message does it send to us here in China and the rest of the world? And secondly, we have heard a lot of rule of law in the United States, but one of the candidates who could blindly talk about putting another candidate into jail once he is in the office. Of course, he could elaborate with his kinds of personality, but he said that, and he's one of the presidential candidates. So what kind of message does it really send about America to the rest of the world, to China, for example?
Well, as a Chinese, for me to watch the presidential election in the United States, I have to say I'm very sorry to see that to a very significant degree that the debates of a presidential election has been reduced to personal attacks and to use such extreme wording to phrase the points that they want to make. And I think, well, as I'm a Chinese, I have to say I'm very sorry to see that. And the United States has been regarded as a symbol of rule of law. And under those circumstances, you do not use those extreme phrases, especially in the presidential campaign.
Professor Chambers, before I go to Mr. Duncan, let me ask you about this. For those of you who are now in Washington, for those of you who belongs to the so-called elite of the U.S., for those of you who have been, together with many others around the world, responsible for building the future of the world, what kind of electoral process do you think that the U.S. should have? And what kind of messages does this presidential election so far send to you? Is there going to be some soul searching in Washington, elsewhere in the U.S., so that the system could be better and you will have a more respectable presidential campaign process?
I think that there will be soul searching after the election. Unfortunately, it will only last maybe 6 months, and then we'll go back to what
You're already very
us in the
optimistic,
past.
sir, I have to say.
Yes, yeah. I mean, we're not going to see us go to a parliamentary system where you have different factions and smaller parties. I don't think that's going to happen. I think that you know, every now and then in the United States we have these confrontations and these kinds of factionalism, and it has to work itself out. I don't know whether that's going to happen this time, but I'm not optimistic given the level of hatred that you have now for Hillary Clinton. If she's elected, there will be those problems. I don't see the Republican Party knitting itself back together again anytime soon. So it's going to be a very difficult time for us. And it's embarrassing for us in the eyes of the rest of the world.
Mr. Dunn, as a journalist yourself, you saw the Florida voting, adding, counting the votes.
chance.
Yes, indeed. You've seen some of the earlier debates of who exactly should be the president, and now you see an interesting presidential election process. Should the system be updated? Has it kept up with what's going on?
The answer is it should be updated. It has not kept up. It's very hard to change.
What are the options?
The options would be a national primary would be if we're talking theoretically, where you would have, let's just say around the beginning of September, each party votes, chooses a candidate. If there's no candidate who gets a majority, they have a runoff to choose the candidate, something like that. The problem is that the system is so deeply ingrained with two small states leading the way, and then this process that lasts 6 months, that you can't unilaterally change it. Congress could not pass a law that would do that. So it's really unrealistic. What's more realistic is the two parties control their own system, nominating system. The Republicans will change it. So someone like Donald Trump couldn't get the nomination while he's winning these primaries with 30% of the vote.
Right.
They want to make sure that somebody gets more support to win the nomination.